welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. Yes, I'm still dressed as Catherine of Aragon, and I will continue to dress as Catherine of Aragon until I finish my Catherine of Aragon book. Today's video, nothing to do with Catherine of Aragon, it's to do with your most hated books. So what I thought I would do, I thought it would be interesting as to put out something on Instagram to say, let me know what your most hated book was, and I'm gonna react to some of those most hated books. Now, I plan to react to all of them, but guys, I had like over 300 books mentioned, and that's not even over 300 people getting back to me. That's more than that because I've got like multiple votes for books in particular. I'm not going to do it in any sort of order. I'm literally going to just work through the ones that I've received. But the only thing I have done is I've stuck to the books that I've read. I had planned to react to all sorts, even and read the blurbs of the ones that I hadn't read, etc. But there were so many, I've just stuck to the ones that I've read. So here are all the books that you guys hate, and my reactions and thoughts on those books. Some of these books I also hate, so I don't think any of them. Oh no, there are a few I own, but I'm just going to insert the pictures here. So yeah, let's get kicking. So the first one, which I was surprised received a couple of, well, I'd say a couple, 6 votes, was Leave the World Behind by Rumam Alam, I think it is. Oh, I haven't got it at the moment. I've lent it out to a friend. This is a book that I read towards the end of last year. Very much enjoyed it. Sort of like spooky, what's going on type of... Well, I'll tell you the plot, guys, and this plot will hook you in. The one thing I will say about finding out what everyone's most hated books were is that I haven't been able to get any sort of like background on that. So it might be that you were reading it at a bad time. I know that definitely affects my reading. Or it might be that you hated the plot, the characters, the writing, might be something else in there. But because I just asked simply for the names of these books, that's all the information I have. So if you answer me and you'd like to share more information in the comments below, please do. So yeah, as I said, Leave the World Behind, a book I read last year. Very much enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars and I've lent it to quite a few people, which I don't always do with my 5-star books, because sometimes I think if I give a book a 5-star, it means that it's very specific to me and how much I loved it. But this one is a 4-star. I lent to a lot of people, and I think it's actually on, it might even be on David's bedside cabinet at the moment waiting to be read. What's it about, Lauren, for fuck's sake? It's about a family who go on holiday. They rent a property outside of a city in America. I think it might be New York, and while they're there, they're having a nice time and all sorts. And then seemingly the owners of this property turn up and say, there's been a massive power outage in the city, we've got nowhere to go, we would like to stay here. And these people who have booked the property are like, well, how do we know that these are the people that have booked that own the property? Like, we've only had correspondence with you over email. And then it's sort of like the family dynamics of 2 families coming together and living in a shared space that neither of them really spend much time in, and there's no phone signal, and they're trying to find out what's going on in the city. And yeah, loads and loads of sort of like open ends and suspicions, building tension all the time. I really enjoyed this. I'll be interested if you were one of the people who said to me that you didn't like Leave the World Behind, what it was about it you didn't like, because yeah, for me, I really enjoyed it, and I've recommended it to quite a few people with different reading tastes. So an interesting first one that came back. Another one is one that got loads of votes, and that's Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights used to be one of my favourite books, and it was a book that I reread almost every year. And yeah, I've actually got a cloth-bound classic version of it up there, which is sort of bashed about, and all the pictures on the front have faded where I've held it so much. But on more recent rereads, I have not enjoyed it as much. I found it sulky and full of like dickhead people, which it is, which I think in my early days of reading it was something that I liked about it, was that I had these characters that were like, I was free to sort of like really dislike. I also think the reason I liked it so much is it was definitely one of the more readable classics, and one of a classic that I could sort of read and really know what was going on with the plot, which is not always the case for me and classics. Sometimes I'm a bit like, God, this is all going over my head. I'm not really sure what's happening and who these characters are and what they're talking about and where they're at. But I never felt like that with Wuthering Heights. I also really enjoyed reading out the conversations, particularly because they've got different accents and things like that, and I feel like that is written really well on the page. But yes, I can see why this would be people would not like this. It's very moody, like I said, full of sulky idiots and sort of like just unreasonable behaviour which sort of comes out of nowhere a lot of the time. So yeah, I can completely see why people don't like Wuthering Heights. It used to be one of my favourites, and yeah, it's not so much one of my favourites now. My Brilliant Friend was another book that got loads of votes of people who hated it. I also hated this book. I very, very rarely do individual reviews on books, but I was so hyped for this book. I'd heard so much stuff about it. It had been featuring on BookTube for so long. So many people had hauled it and read it and loved it, saying that the Neapolitan series was the best series they'd ever read, how much they loved it. And I read it and was so disappointed I did an individual review, and the comments on that individual review, people were cross with me for not liking that book. So I know it's very, very beloved, but yeah, for me, I found it boring, dreary. Again, the characters, I did not like the characters, and yeah, it just did nothing for me. I found the writing quite simplistic as well, which I know a lot of people would definitely disagree with me. People think that the writing is rich and wonderful and like immersive, but I did not find that at all. And yeah, that's a hill I'm willing to die on. I really did not enjoy that book at all. Next up is Piranesi, which is another book that I really, really enjoyed. In fact, it was in my top 10, not even my top 10, I think it was in my top 3 books of last year. Really, really enjoyed it, by Susanna Clarke. It was the eventual winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction last year, and this got a few votes. I think more than say I can understand why someone would hate this book, I can understand that it's not for everyone, is what I will say. It's quite unusual, and I can't really go into big details about the plot, because for your enjoyment, if you haven't read it yet, what I enjoyed about it was the way it sort of unfolded. But you sort of arrive in these massive, vacuous, grand halls, and you're following the day-to-day life of a character called Piranesi, who spends much time by themselves, and only meets with somebody that they call the other, is it once or twice a week, and tells them about this sort of vacuous halls and where they live and things like that. The writing is almost, the diary writing is almost like that of a child. So maybe that's something, if people don't get on with sort of like child narrators, maybe that's why that wasn't happening. And then it's quite deep, and to be honest, the end was sort of like maybe bigger than my brain could handle as well. So maybe that's another reason. But yeah, really, really enjoyed that book. I think when it comes to sort of like hated books, maybe it's like overhyped books as well, because I definitely know that added to me why I didn't like My Brilliant Friend so much. So if someone has seen that this book Piranesi has won the Women's Prize, and like lots of people, myself included, are hyping about it, and then they're reading it and they're like, what the fuck is going on? Because there is a lot of what the fuck is going on in that book. That might be one of the reasons. Speaking of what the fuck is going on, another book that was shortlisted for the Women's Prize last year, Why No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. So many votes for this, and I am on board with that, because I did not know what was going on during this book. So much so that I actually felt sort of like a bit left out and a bit cross when I was reading it. What I didn't realise when I was reading it is that it's told in tweets. I didn't feel like I had that knowledge going in, and there's a lot, like, I just didn't really know what was going on. There's sort of tweets about the American president at the time, and yeah, just loads of stuff. I just didn't really know what was happening, and I felt cross because I didn't know what was going on, and that's why I hated that book. So maybe the people who hated that book felt the same way as me. Next up is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. I read this as this was one of my book club reads for last year, and I actually listened to the audiobook of it. I'm not a fan of Matt Haig, and I know a lot of people are. I find his work a bit trite, maybe a bit sort of like, have you just tried being a bit cheerful? Like that sort of thing. And yeah, but I know a lot of people, he's very, very beloved to people, and I always say this a bit like, because I feel like a lot of people love him. This book, The Midnight Library, follows a woman and the sort of what-ifs in her life. The audiobook I listened to was narrated by Carey Mulligan. Now, I've listened to Carey Mulligan's audio narrations before and enjoyed them. She's a fine actress who I very much enjoy watching her performances, but her delivery of this was monotonous and like boring. It made me not enjoy it even more. I wasn't like keen on the sort of the big storyline in there and stuff like that, like, and where it was going, and I was sort of like rolling my eyes a little bit, but yeah, the whole performance didn't add to it. That being said, I did buy this book for David's dad. I think maybe for Easter last year, so we're talking like a whole year ago. I'll have to ask him if he actually got around to reading it, because I thought he would sort of enjoy the storyline of it. I wonder how we got on with that. I'll have to ask him. But yeah, so I did not enjoy this book, but I was aware that I thought I knew somebody who would enjoy that book. So even though I didn't enjoy it, I have bought that book for somebody else. Next up is The Secret Commonwealth, the second in the Book of Dust series. Where is the third book in the Book of Dust? They were coming out sort of every other October, and it was due to come out last October. Something About Roses, I think, is the last one. It hasn't come out. The Secret Commonwealth is not sort of a book that I enjoyed very much. Also, I wouldn't say I hated it. I just felt more sort of like disappointed and let down, which I am aware are sort of like feelings that could turn to hate in terms of a book. But yeah, The Secret Commonwealth, second book in the Book of Dust series, which is a series that runs sort of before, alongside, and after his Dark Materials series. The Secret Commonwealth follows Lyra, I think, is it 10 years or 20 years after the end of the, I always gave a massive fucking spoiler then for the Amber Spyglass, after the end of the Amber Spyglass, and it follows very much her relationship with Pan, and those were probably the bits I enjoyed maybe the most. But yeah, the whole thing, like, I didn't get on with it. But I really enjoyed the first book, by the way, the first Book of Dust book, La Belle Sauvage. I enjoyed that a lot. But yeah, The Secret Commonwealth I didn't. I will re-listen to it probably when the third one comes out, just so I can familiarise myself with it. I might even do it, I think last time when I listened to that, I'm going to do it in like the order that they come. So like I'll listen to La Belle Sauvage, then I'll do his Dark Materials, then I'll do The Secret Commonwealth, and then I don't actually know where the third book run. I'll have to listen to that in there. But yeah, I can understand why people didn't like it. It wasn't very good. Then The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Maria Kondo. I also hate this book. There were so many sort of things in the book that I was just like, this is just daft. I'm a person who loves stuff, she says, sat in front of a bookshelf of 300 books that she hasn't read yet. And yeah, I love sort of like, more recently I've loved buying secondhand stuff and things like that. So this was never going to be for me. Again, I think this was from my early days of booktubing, when there was a lot of hype around this book. Potentially, I mean, I can't remember if there were any good tips in there, because all I can remember is like daft tips that I did not enjoy. I'd misremembered one actually, because I'd misremembered that she'd said, oh, if you don't want to keep any books, then rip out the favourite parts of favourite pages of your books and put them into like a folder or a binder or something. And somebody corrected me and said that's not what she said. She said something completely different. So I'd got myself so worked up that that's how I'd remembered it. One thing I do remember she said though, because I thought it was absolutely daft, was don't leave your shampoo and conditioner out on the side. Put it away in a cupboard, because it will it won't be as, like, it won't work as well if it's out on the side. Come on, babes, just tell me to put it away. Don't try and fuel me up with some daft old explanation. So yeah, this wasn't for me, and I imagine the people who said they hate this is also people who like stuff. But yeah, it's very preachy and not enjoyable. The Twyford Code was another one that I got a few votes for. This was also a book I didn't enjoy. You will know that The Appeal by Janice Hallett was one of my favourite books for last year. David read it more recently. I did a vlog of David reading it in one weekend, and he got so much joy out of reading it. I got so much joy out of watching him reading it. But yeah, so Janice Hallett's sort of like book after The Appeal, I didn't get any joy from, really. I had a proof copy, and I wonder the reasons I didn't like the book, and I wonder if maybe if I'd have listened to it, it might have been a bit different. But the book itself is written as a transcript of audio files that are found on a phone, and because it's a transcript of audio files, and this person who you're hearing the audio files from has an accent, there's quite a lot of mistakes in the text. So for example, there's a character called Miss Isles, and throughout the text she's referred to as Miss Isles. Similar with the word Bournemouth, which is a place in the UK where a lot of the activity in the book happens, is constantly referred to as Bournemouth. And yeah, that just sort of took me out of it. Every time I was reading it, it didn't really flow very well for me. And by the time we sort of got to what potentially was quite a clever ending, I'd run out of steam, and I hadn't enjoyed it at all, which was a shame because I loved The Appeal so much. But yeah, I got a few votes for people saying they weren't keen on the Twyford Code. And the next book I think definitely sort of matches my overhyped theory, and that's Normal People by Sally Rooney, which is a huge sort of the moment book, which is still having its moment even now. Last year there was a TV series of it. More recently, Beautiful World, Where Are You, which is another book by Sally Rooney's come out, which I think makes people talk about her other books as well. A very, very beloved book. and I loved it too. I really enjoyed it. I got an advanced reader's copy of it, which I really enjoyed. I remember reading it and just being like in love with these characters, and really sort of like feeling like in the moment with them. What would people, because I can sort of see, I don't know what I'm thinking, why I can see why people wouldn't like this. Probably the overhyping of it, maybe the resolution. People sometimes like a lot of resolution in books, and this doesn't have much resolution at the end of it. I would say this is quite plotty. It's very character driven. I will say Conversations with Friends, which is another book of hers, I didn't get on with as well, and I didn't particularly like the characters in there, and I do think she writes quite similar characters in those two books that I've read. I haven't read Beautiful World, Where Are You? Even though I mean to read it. So maybe that's another feeling, but yeah, if you are one of those people who said you didn't like normal people, then please do let us know down below. The next one is an author who was mentioned an awful lot of times. Now, I've read one book by this author, which I read for a book club many years ago, and never again will I read anything by this author. And the author that I was given was Colleen Hoover. Many people just got back to me and just said anything by this author. I can't remember, it might be called Between Us or something like that. All of the front covers of this author look exactly the same, so I can't sort of like pinpoint what book it was, but yeah, it was daft. I remember there was like it was an artist thing. I feel like the man written in this book was controlling and awful, but was like promoted to us as this really sort of like intense guy. That's something I fucking hate in romance books, and that's probably something why we'll talk about it now, because that came up as well. 50 Shades of Grey, which is a book I read many years ago, and the same thing, someone who is borderline abusive, or in some cases abusive, is promoted as like this really intense romantic person. A trope I will never be on board with. So those two books as well. Then The Exhibitionist, which is a book that I read more recently by Charlotte Mendelssohn. Listened to the audiobook of this, and yeah, like I've said as well, with books with characters that I don't get on with, I don't always hate those books, but that was the reason I didn't like this book, because I hated the characters in it so much. Particularly the book focuses around a character, Ray. The way he speaks to people made me actually actively on edge and actively not wanted to go back to this book, because I just hated the way he spoke to people. And also his daughter, who sort of like thinks he can do no wrong, like I just did not like her either. So yeah, that book I really didn't like, and I can understand why people wouldn't like it if it was about the characters, because agree. Then I've got another book which I got one vote for, but I wanted to mention it because I also didn't like this book, and that was Olive by Emma Gannon. That is a book about female friendship, and I was like, oh great, a book about female friendship which isn't going to be all about like romance and boys and like finding your next boyfriend or your next husband and things like that. But for me, this was I read it like this because I don't feel like these girls particularly liked each other. They were supposed to be like the best of friends, just everything was supposed to be going wonderfully for them, but I felt like they were really awful to each other, and some of the things they said to each other were really awful, and things that I would never ever say to my friends, including like really personal digs about somebody who's unable to fall pregnant, and then like one of her seemingly friends mention it, like bringing that up in an argument and stuff, and it just didn't sit well with me at all. So yeah, I really didn't like that book, and also disappointment will probably added to that because I was really expecting it to be something that it wasn't for me. Then I've got one of my favourite books of all time, Rebecca. One vote for Rebecca, but need to mention it, guys, because it's one of my favourite books of all times. Why wouldn't people like Rebecca? Because I love Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Maximilian, he's a dick, isn't he? Maybe it's a character thing. I feel like it's pretty heavy in plot and like twists and turns and stuff. I remember the first time I read it being like surprised that all of the stuff was happening that was happening. Why else? The writing I really like as well. Yeah, if you were that person who said you didn't like Rebecca, or if you have read Rebecca and you weren't that fond on it, let me know down below what you didn't like about it. Then Luster, which was a book by Raven, it's not Layla Slimani, Raven Leilani, I think. This was a book I read last year, and again I was very hyped for this. I'd seen it all over BookTube, really excited, and yeah, I just felt the whole thing just fell a bit flat for me. I didn't sort of bond with anybody in this book, and yeah, the plot was a bit sort of wishy-washy for me in terms of like I was never really sure what was going on. So that was another book I liked. Another book that got quite a few votes that I was really surprised about, because this was one of my favourite books from last year, and actually we discussed it for Patreon Book Club, and it was one of my favourite Patreon book clubs of last year, and that's Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I really am interested to hear why people didn't enjoy this. I loved it. We had such a good discussion, and I remember coming away like having learnt so much as well. I learnt so much in this book. So yeah, it's about a sort of triangle of a relationship in a triangle. So you're following a trans woman, a detransitioned trans woman who has got his colleague. So is now was presenting as James, was then Amy, and is now Ames, and has got his boss pregnant, and looking at how they could potentially bring up this baby together as a three. And yeah, really enjoyed this book, and like there's lots in there that I, like I said, I learned a lot, but like it was one of those books where just when I thought this was a book about sort of like how you're gonna bring up a baby in this sort of like very modern situation that I can never imagine having been brought up by like a female mother and a male father, like I then find out it's about sort of like community and what qualities you've got, and kindness and stuff like that, and like seemingly these characters all seem very spiky and like unlikable to begin with. Then you get down into it's very I feel like it was done in so many layers to it. But yeah, really enjoyed that. So yeah, I was surprised to see I've got quite a few votes for that. Another book that was one of my favourite books from last year that got 1 vote, The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. Yeah, this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice told from the point of view of Mary Bennet, and it's told on the run up to, during Pride and Prejudice and afterwards, and I honestly felt like I was reading a Jane Austen book, and I loved it. I loved it so much. I might even love it more than Pride and Prejudice. Like, I had such a good time reading that last year. It's a real big chunky book. I really loved getting to know Mary more, and then sort of like seeing the characters from Pride and Prejudice in like a way which I felt like it was canon. Like it really immersed me, and I loved it. So yeah, one person said they didn't like that. And then the last 2 books that I wanted to mention were The Alchemist, which is a book that I read for a book club, and I also didn't like it. I feel like it was maybe a bit pretentious, all over my head, felt a bit daft. I also remember the person who recommended this for book club, because when we used to do my book club at work, we all used to put a book in a pot, and then we pick it out of that, and the person who put it in said, oh, it's a really good Christmassy book. So I remember going to it thinking it was going to be this lovely sort of like Christmassy tale, and it was not at all. And she said, when I was like, why did you recommend that for Christmas? She said, oh, there's sort of like a glow around it, and I was like, there was no glow for me. And then the last book is The Salt Path by Raina Wynn, which I also did not enjoy. There's parts of this book that I really enjoyed, and I wish I could read a book about the topic that this book is about, but with a more likable main character, because like narrator, because it's non-fiction. I really did not enjoy hearing Raina's point of view on people. So it is following Raina and her husband, who after finding themselves homeless decide to walk the southwestern coast, and they don't seem like the typical people who are going to do this. They're both older people, and I enjoyed hearing about the sort of nature writing and the cliffs and the sea and all of this. But to be honest, Raina just had some really negative, awful views on people, including like people who I assimilate with. Fat people, for example, people with loud voices, and like every time I would read a little beautiful bit about nature writing, I'd think, oh fucking hell, Raina, why are you saying this horrible thing about some fat loud woman on the bus? Because that fat loud woman on the bus is probably me. Someone who's just talking to her friends, not even like, yeah, just like, I just didn't like it. Also, like, they had such a little amount of money that they had to sort of like play with in order to play with well, a little amount of money to feed themselves with, and they'd fucking spend it on like wine gums. There was just moments in there I was just like, this is all daft. So yeah, there we go. There are my reaction to some of your most hated books. I wasn't able to do a lot of them. I will read you out some of the titles of ones that I haven't read that people hated. A Court of Thorn and Roses, The Circle, Shadow of the Wind, Girl A, Tidelands, The Roanoke Girls, Skellig, Girl It Was a Half-Formed Thing, Dracula, Lanny, the Pisces, the people in the trees. Yeah, so there we go. Those was there's pages of it here. There's pages of it here. But yeah, very much enjoyed doing this, and hope you enjoyed thinking about some of these books with me. And I'll see you all again soon for another BookTube video. Goodbye.